Please tell me the last thing we talked about yesterday.
1932. Well, it was, we were on the profile of Franklin D. Roosevelt, and it was how he became president. Like we were talking about 1932.
Okay, so we got through the polio, and we just told you that he was the only man in history to be elected to 4 terms, right?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. All right. Well, after being elected president, but prior to him being inaugurated into office, he took a brief vacation to Florida. So prior to his inauguration as President of the United States, Franklin Roosevelt took a brief vacation to Florida. Remember, what month did they get inaugurated? Anybody remember? No, that's now. March then, yeah. So on February 15th of 1933, February 15th of 1933, Franklin Roosevelt decides to deliver a speech in Miami, Florida, from the back of his automobile. So he's going to stand up in his convertible and give a speech. On February 15th of 1933, Franklin Roosevelt decides to deliver a speech in Miami, Florida, from the back of his convertible automobile. As he's delivering his speech, an unemployed bricklayer, bear with me, named F.P. Zengara, just N.P. Zengara, I worked on that today, by the way, shouts, "Too many people are starving," and fires a gun at the president-elect. So as the president-elect was delivering his speech in Miami, Florida, an unemployed bricklayer named Giuseppe Zengara shouts, "Too many people are starving," and fires a gun toward President-elect Roosevelt. Okay? He's giving a speech, remember, before he's president, right? He fires 6 shots, and 5 different people are hit. He fires 6 shots, 5 different people are hit. Roosevelt escaped injury. But the mayor of Chicago was there, Anton Cermak, and he received a mortal stomach wound. What does mortal mean? He will die afterwards. Yep. So he was mayor. So Roosevelt escaped injury, but Chicago Mayor Anton Cermak received a mortal stomach wound during the attack. In other words, he was shot, wounded, and eventually died from.
And the president was hit?
He was not.
Was not.
A woman, girls, Rosie Riveter, a woman by the name of Lillian Cross saw Zengara pull his gun and tried to grab him, swatting his arm as he was shooting. A woman by the name of Lillian Cross saw Zengara pull the gun, and she actually tried to grab him, swatting his arm as he was shooting. This is kind of interesting. After the shooting, several men tackled Zengara, and a lot of historians think they might have beaten the guy to death, but guess who intervened and stepped in? President-elect Roosevelt stepped in, and he urged the angry crowd to leave justice to the authorities. So Zengara survives the assault by the men that tackled him as soon as he shot his pistol. So again, a woman by the name of Lillian Cross saw Zengara pull his gun. She tried to grab him, swatted his arm as he was shooting. Several men tackled Zengara and might have beaten him to death if Roosevelt would have not intervened, as he urged the angry crowd to leave justice to the authorities, and Zengara survived this assault. Now, this is kind of interesting because if anybody doubted Franklin Roosevelt's ability or his composure, they certainly didn't after that. The composure he showed during his assassination attempt was put in the following day's newspapers nationwide, and it really helped enforce his public image as a strong leader. So it did not hurt him public relation-wise. Now, Zangara was initially tried for attempted murder, and they sentenced him to 80 years in prison. Initially tried for attempted murder, which tells you what? Think a little bit. Hanford, what happened? I told you he shot the mayor of Chicago, Mayor Cermak, but he was mortally wounded, which means he died later. So when they arrested Zangara and they tried him for attempted murder of who? The president and Mayor Cermak. Okay? And they sentenced him to 80 years in prison. Well, what happens? That's right. When Mayor Cermak died of what's called peritonitis, which is infection of the abdomen, 19 days later, Zangara was retried and sentenced to death. Now, I'll repeat it. I'll repeat it. So, Zangara was initially tried for attempted murder, right? Because he shot at several people, hitting 5. That's attempted murder. Okay? And he shot at the president, which is a felony. Anyway, okay? So he was tried for that, and he was sentenced to 80 years in prison. However, when Chicago Mayor Cermak died of peritonitis, which is infection of the abdomen, 19 days later, Zangara was retried and sentenced to death. 19 days he died after he was shot. That would be Mayor Cermak.
That was a pretty quick trial.
Yeah, it was. When you're shooting at the president, they don't mess around normally, yeah.
So it was 19 days after he was shot that he died?
That's right,
Oh.
yeah. Well, Zangara was sentenced to death, as I mentioned, and he was put to death on March 5th, 1933. He was put to death on March 5th, 1933.
Less than a month.
How was he put to death?
Shot.
Electric chair. Yeah, they did the electric chair. Boy, I think that'd be horrible. But that's what they did. Well, we're going to talk about Roosevelt throughout his 4 terms in the future. So I'm just going to go ahead to his 4th term. He's elected to a 4th term, and we'll tell you what he did here in his terms. But he was elected to his 4th term, and he traveled from Washington, D.C. to Warm Springs, Georgia for a little vacation. So after he was elected president in 1944, shortly after he took office, in March, he traveled from Washington, D.C. to Warm Springs, Georgia for a little restful vacation. This had been shortly after he was inaugurated in March of 45, for his 4th term. Well, on April 12th of 1845, he was working at his desk while an artist was painting his portrait. So what's that? It was April 12th of 1945, just about a month after he was inaugurated into office for the 4th term, less than a month. He was just simply working at his desk in Warm Springs, Georgia, and an artist was there painting his portrait as he was working at his desk. The artist noted that the president whispered, "I have a terrible headache," and simply fell over in his chair. So as Roosevelt was working at his desk while an artist was painting his portrait, the artist later noted that the president whispered, "I have a terrible headache," and simply fell over in his chair. Well, he had suffered a cerebral hemorrhage. You know what that is? Blood in the brain. He had blood in the brain, kind of a stroke, so to speak, a cerebral hemorrhage, and he died just a few hours later. So Roosevelt dies very early into his 4th term. So Roosevelt dies a few hours later of a cerebral hemorrhage. He would eventually be buried back at his hometown of Hyde Park, New York. He whispered, "I have a terrible headache." Now, we'll get into this later, okay? But he's going to be succeeded by Harry S. Truman, and what's Harry S. Truman going to inherit? The latter stages of World War II. And Truman makes the decision to drop the atomic bomb on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. So that's how that history ends. But there's a lot of things that Roosevelt did between the time he was elected in 1932 and his death in April of 45. Okay, that'll take us to our next subtopic then, which is the 100 days. The 100 days. This is a little bit of a historic thing because it goes right to today. Anybody know what the 100 days in an American presidency means? Anybody know?
The first 100 days.
It does, but what's the significance of that? And Roosevelt started it.
They live.
No?
If you take action in the first 100 days, then you're...
Close.
It's when they talk about what their plan for the presidency is gonna consist of.
Close, but it's also, you're very close, but it's also when they take action toward that plan. And so, the Franklin Roosevelt presidency, his way of doing things resulted in historically what we know today as 100 days. During the first 3 months or 100 days of Roosevelt's administration, he passed 15 different laws through Congress. That's almost unheard of. So again, in the first 3 months or 100 days of Franklin Roosevelt's presidency, they passed 15 different pieces of legislation or laws through Congress. What do you think these laws were passed to do? Get us out of the Great Depression. Now, as you mentioned, these laws were passed to help fight every aspect of the Great Depression. And this period of time, when he passed 15 laws, which was unprecedented, began being called the 100 Days. And from that point in American history, the first 3 months of a president's term is going to be referred to as the 100 days. President Trump went through the same thing, and what it is now, it's an evaluation of what a president has accomplished in the first 3 months in office, and it usually means that historians can predict if the president is going to be a success during his time in office by what he gets done the first 100 days. So, you didn't pay any attention to that the last election because you didn't know it. But when we have the next election, 3 months into the president's, whoever it is, either President Trump re-election or Joe Biden, who's going to run against him, I guess, at this point, there will be a political reference to what the president does in his first 100 days. And that is supposed to be a predictor for historians to let you know whether this guy is going to be, or gal now, is going to be any good as a president from what they did their first 3 months in office. But it all started because of everything great that Roosevelt got done during his first 3 months in office. Okay, now we're going to start talking about what Roosevelt's doing to help this depression. And the first one we're going to talk about is New Deal. Remember, that was the name of his presidency. New Deal measures to solve probably the biggest problem he has in the Great Depression, which is unemployment. So New Deal measures to solve the issue of unemployment. That's the biggest problem he has when he takes office. Most urgent task that he had to face when he took office was trying to get these millions of unemployed men and their families financial support by getting them jobs. Anybody remember by 1932 how many people were unemployed? 12 million. Very good. 12 million. Keep that in mind, because by the time he took office in March of 1933, 14 million were out of work. So 2 million men lost their jobs from the time that the election ended to the time he took office. Went from 12 to 14 million.
What was the date? March of 1933.
Yeah, well, I'm just telling you, when he was inaugurated in March of 1933, the unemployment rate was 14 million people. Now, Roosevelt got busy and he talked Congress into passing a law called the Federal Emergency Relief Act. These are very important that you have these in your notes. If you're going to use your notes on the test, you're going to need to know these because they're going to be on the test. So make sure you get these down. I'm not giving you a review. You're simply able to use your notes. So Roosevelt talks Congress into passing the Federal Emergency Relief Act. And basically what that act did is it came up with $3 billion, which would be $55 billion today, to help these needy Americans. And they took this $3 billion and they gave so much to each state based on, very good, population. And those states were to take that money, and it allowed both state and local governments to use the money in two different ways to help people that were unemployed. Now I would tell you this, first of all, this is a lot different time period than today, where most people that are on unemployment aren't making a great effort to find a job. It pays more to be unemployed than it does to be employed, and you have to do a lot less work. So it's a lot different. People are very critical of our relief programs today because of that. Now, again, this money would be distributed to individual states, and each state and each city even in the state could distribute the money they were given to help people in two different ways. One was direct relief for the unemployed. I'm going to explain to you what that is, and you need to know it. Direct relief for the unemployed. What's direct relief?
Right there.
What's that?
I think it's right there.
So you're not working, so I'm going to give you X amount of dollars, kind of like what unemployment does now. The other way that this money was spent was to create and provide jobs for the people that were unemployed. So the money from the Federal Emergency Relief Act, which is about $3 billion at the time, that money was divided among all states depending on their population, and state and local governments could use that money any way they wanted to use it, okay? To do one or two things, either giving direct relief to the unemployed, which means you just hand them some money to get them by, or you use the money to find jobs for the unemployed. Now at this time in history, a biggest majority of your families did not want direct relief. What did they want? They wanted a job. They didn't want to be embarrassed to say they were taking a handout from the government. They wanted a job. So most people at this time were saying, hey, no, I don't want a, quote, handout. I want a job. So the government, when they figured that out, started spending more money towards providing and creating jobs than they did just to hand the money out. Why? Because the American people didn't want a handout in 1933. They wanted a job. That was your manhood. In those days, women didn't work a lot, so your job as a man was to go to work, provide from your family while your wife stayed home and took care of the kids. Your job was the breadwinner. Men didn't want their wives working. That was embarrassing in these times, especially if they were working and you were not. It was almost unheard of. Okay? So, the government figures out people don't want handouts in 1933. They want jobs. Okay? So, what the Roosevelt administration did is they created something in 1935 called the Work Progress Administration. So again, moving from direct relief to the creation of jobs, the federal government and the Roosevelt administration in 1935 created what we know as the Work Progress Administration. What do you think that Works Progress Administration's job was? To find work for people. Well, you got to have somebody that's the head of an organization like that. You got to have a chairman, or you got to have a president. And the man that was picked to lead the Work Progress Administration was Harry L. Hopkins. Harry L. Hopkins. Ironically, I got to tell you this story. I was in Washington, D.C. with my kids, and there's a really nice bookstore down from our motel. And I knew we were getting into this, so I bought this book right here. And the book is copyright of, hang with me, (1948), and the title of the book is Roosevelt and Hopkins. And here is a picture of Harry L. Hopkins, the man that Roosevelt picked to be the head of the Work Progress Administration. Must have been a pretty important administration if somebody wrote a book this thick about the two guys, right? So keep that in mind. I smiled when I saw that. I thought, I'm going to buy that because we'll be lecturing on it pretty soon. Well, basically what happened is Congress provided $6.3 billion, which would be about $117 billion today, to create jobs in the following three areas. So again, first thing the Work Progress Administration did, under the direction of Harry L. Hopkins, was to spend $6.3 billion that Congress appropriated for the following three areas to create jobs. Question?
Oh, I missed this. I forgot to ask you. So $3 billion was how much into?
You way back, you mean?
Yeah, $3 billion.
$3 billion in the old days that they used for the Federal Emergency Relief Act is about $55 billion today. The $6.3 billion is about $116 billion today. Now, here are the areas in which they put people to work. School construction. They started building schools. Or they started doing what to schools? Repairing them, upgrading them.